We're ready. I'm just showing Dal and Henderson. Okay. Going to call to order. Today is Monday, August 5th. The Budget and Finance Committee meeting will begin with resolutions. RS 2019-1847, sponsors Virtue and Roberts, approves a grant from the Tennessee Department of Transportation to the Davidson County Sheriff's Office to provide litter pickup along state and county roads and education on litter abatement and prevention. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1843, sponsors Virtue and Roberts, accepts a donation of gym equipment from Christopher Drew Claudel to the Metro Nashville Police Department. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1844, sponsors Virtue and Roberts, approves a grant from the U.S. Department of Justice to the Office of Family Safety for an accessibility coordinator to identify service barriers and create an accessibility plan. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1845, sponsors Virtue and Roberts, approves a contract between the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services and the Nashville Fire Department to authorize the state to pay the Metro Emergency Transportation Services. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1846, sponsors Virtue and Roberts, approves a grant from the Tennessee Highland Rim Healthcare Coalition to the Metro Nashville Office of Emergency Management to purchase a risk and crisis communications course. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1848, sponsors Virtue and Gilmore, approves a contract for services between the Metro Board of Health and Neighborhood Health Incorporated to provide homeless individuals with medical services at 2 or more clinics in or near downtown Nashville. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilman Pulley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just get somebody to speak to this. I have a couple of very quick questions.
We have Mr. Sharp coming down.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp. I understand this is Metro funding of up to $355,200. It comes and it's for initial one-year term. I assume this is a contract renewal and the source of the funds is out of your current budget, which is required by charter. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. It's a long-standing contract that is allotted to what is now known as Neighborhood Health. Used to be United Neighborhoods, primarily to run the downtown clinic for homeless services.
Okay. If you could just tell us as a matter of process how one qualifies to obtain these services.
Well, so what do we require of them for that money? They have to see a certain number of people, provide certain types and number of services to folks. I don't think that contract is bid. I think it's been a long-standing. We used to run that clinic, and I believe the deal has long been that we would pay them to run it. And that doesn't run the whole clinic by any stretch of imagination. They have a lot more money that comes in there than that.
Okay. I have nothing further. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Pulley. Councilwoman Gilmore.
Thank you. Councilmember Pulley asked some of my questions. Thank you.
Okay. Councilwoman Allen.
Thank you. I just wondered if we have any data that shows what this would cost us if it instead were these folks ended up in the emergency room instead of getting the care in this proactive way. Do we have those numbers by any chance?
I don't know. I mean, we could take a guess because you certainly know that's a more expensive way to get care. And they do. There's the downtown mission is down there also. They provide a lot of vaccinations. They've been a real good partner with us on the Hep A outbreak to get the homeless population vaccinated. I don't really know,
Okay.
Lady Allen, but it would be more.
I just think it's helpful to have that on the record as yes, it would be more if we're not doing this proactively. And I guess we'll come back to this on the next one as a similar type of arrangement. I don't know if it's fair to ask about the next bill, but I'd love to have that same statement made on the next bill as well. Thank you.
You can stay there, Mr. Sharp. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1849, sponsors Vercher and Gilmore, approves a grant between the Metro Board of Health and the Mental Health Cooperative to provide a secure drop-off location for persons needing a mental health urgent care alternative to an emergency room or correctional facility. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilwoman Gilmore.
Thank you, Chair Vercher. If we could have someone to speak to this, please.
Yes, ma'am. That is an appropriation that comes to us for a relay, in effect, to the mental health co-op at Metro Center. You remember, I think it was about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, sometime recently, they expanded their drop-off center. The idea was that a lot of the policemen were getting caught up providing security for people in mental health crisis that they took there, and they might have to stay for hours sometimes because they didn't have proper security at the place. There was a coalition that was put together back during the PIP process from a few years ago to try to stop taking people to jail when they weren't dangerous criminals. They were simply having a mental health crisis of some kind and try to get them diverted from jail into treatment. And so they expanded that, and Metro helps fund that expansion and operation.
Very good. And so is there a number that people know about that you can promote this so that they'll know not to, I know this is another piece to it, but so that they'll know not to criminalize it and call maybe like 911 or 862-8600?
We've got a couple of groups of which we are a part that look constantly at ways to try to divert people from jail when really all they have a problem with is some sort of mental health crisis. It's not a new question. It's not something we're not aware of. There's a lot of work that goes into trying to figure out the best way to make that an institutional decision. That's the easiest one to make.
Mm-hmm. And who are your partners? Do you know who some of the partners are?
It's a fairly large group of people.
Okay, well, I can just get it later. I thought maybe it was just one or two. You can just forward us that information.
Sure.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Allen.
Same question. Would you say this is less costly than running it through the legal system or jails or the alternatives to this?
It is, and it's less costly for the police in terms of the time that they have to spend as well, so that they can drop folks off. They've got the drop-off time down under 10 minutes now, so that they can drop folks off and then go on back to doing their
Seems like a
job.
very good solution to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1850, sponsors Vercher and Gilmore, approves a grant from the Tennessee Department of Human Services to the Metro Board of Health to conduct immunization record audits for child care centers, drop-in centers, and group child care homes. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilwoman Gilmore.
Barb, can speak to this, please? Thank you.
Madam Chairman, that is a pretty small amount of money. It funds a part of a position to audit the licensed child care centers to make sure that they're checking properly for immunizations and keeping up with the records.
So do they go in to actually check their records, or the child care facilities have to send it to the auditor?
They go to them.
Okay. And do they give them a heads up, or is it just kind of something where they pop up?
I don't know.
Okay. Be nice to know. Thank you.
Councilwoman Weiner.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. Permit me to do this sitting down because I have a bum leg. Tom, could you share with us a little bit about how that process works, the viewing audience, because you have so many parents that look for childcare that don't understand what some of the rating systems look like. So could you maybe discuss that a little bit?
Child care centers, to be licensed by the state, they have to meet certain criteria.
Right.
One of them is to check for vaccinations of the children in the place. And so all we try to do is go out and make sure that they are following those criteria that are set forth by the state. The rating system is a state program.
But do you turn that information into them so that they then can in turn include that in their rating system?
I think that's a binary yes or no. They either have it or they don't. And probably, I'm sure we would report that to the licensing agency.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sharp. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. Mr. Sharp, you may just want to stay until we finish with yours. RS 2019-1851, sponsors Vircher Gilmore, approves a grant from the Tennessee Department of Health to the Metro Board of Health to provide an array of programs and direct patient care services to meet the public health needs of Tennessee citizens. Is there a motion? So moved. It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilwoman Allen.
Thank you. I just wonder if we get a little bit more detail on what those programs and services are.
Mr. Sharp.
So that is our favorite pot of money. You know, most of the grants that come to us are for a specific purpose, for HIV treatment, for STD treatment, for whatever it might be. This is the state's recognition that there are other things that we might need to do that don't have quite so many strings attached to it. It's $725,000, which it has been for at least a decade. But it is grant and aid. It's to use it as you need to. And it's by far the most flexible amount of money that we have.
Councilwoman Allen.
Yeah, and so does it vary from year to year, or do you typically use it for?
You try not to use it for salaries unless you absolutely have to for a short period of time until you can get one put on something else. But we use it to supplement this and supplement that, and it's really useful.
Just wherever you have the gaps,
Yeah.
This is how you fill in. Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Gilmore.
Thank you, Chair Vircher. I wanted to ask Mr. Sharp, there was some, let me get it right. Okay, so there was a group or committee that was ran that treated violence as a public health issue at the health department. I haven't heard much about that. How is that going?
The young fellow that did that has left the department. That position is now being refilled, and there are some other efforts underway within the government to have a broader coalition to look at that issue.
Okay, so is it,
And it will still be housed in the health department, as I understand it.
okay, so you guys are looking for another director right now?
For another coordinator, yeah.
Okay, and is the work on hold, or when would it be?
No, his primary objective initially was to create this sort of grassroots coalition which continues to exist and continues to do its work. You heard from the Gideon's Army folks about the cure violence approach, which is that treat violence as a contagion and try to interrupt it when you can. That is a type of approach that's used. They are part of that coalition too, I think.
Okay, so thank you so much. And I thought it was applicable because he said they could use it for a variety of programs, and I would just like for us to be mindful of that. I will be rolling off of the council, but I do know that they were looking at it as a health issue, which is very important instead of criminalizing violence in the city. And so we know that there is quite a bit of violence in our city, so I would like for us to stay mindful and keep our finger on the pulse of that program. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gilmore. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1852, sponsors Vircher, Syracuse, and Allen, approves a grant from the Tennessee Arts Commission to Creative Parks Nashville in conjunction with the Metro Parks and Recreation Department to provide 12 big band dances at the Centennial Park Event Shelter. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1853, sponsor Vircher, authorizes the Metro Department of Law to compromise and settle the property damage claim of Donna Pokowitz against Metro in the amount of $12,707.43. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1854, sponsors Vircher O'Connell, approves a grant from the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation to the Metro Public Works Department to assist in the annual operation, maintenance, and facility improvements of its permanent household hazardous waste collection facility. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1855, sponsors Vircher Bettany O'Connell, approves an intergovernmental agreement between the Tennessee Department of Transportation and the Metro Department of Public Works for traffic signal improvements in connection with construction at the I-65 northbound exit ramp at State Route 254. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilman Pulley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, a quick question for Public Works.
We have a Mr. Hammond.
Yes, sir.
Yes, it looks like we are not responsible for any of the costs associated with the construction part of this project, but we would be responsible for the maintenance of the new traffic signals. I'm assuming that's negligible.
That's correct. This is a standard maintenance agreement between us and TDOT. They are building 100% of the project. It's traffic signals. It also is some minor construction in the lanes. They're along Old Hickory Boulevard along the south border of the county.
Thank you very much. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Pulley. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1856, sponsor Vircher Bettany O'Connell, approves an intergovernmental agreement between the Tennessee Department of Transportation and the Metro Department of Public Works for the reimbursement of railroad crossing safety improvements at 2nd Avenue. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Councilwoman Gilmore.
Yes, if we could just have a little bit more information about this, it would be great.
Mr. Hammond.
These are what are called diagnostic team reports. They are safety projects at some particular at-grade railroad crossings with streets. Those are identified by TDOT and selected by TDOT. Those are 90% funded, 10% local. In this case, it's only roughly a $3,000 project that makes our share $308. These are low cost, very quick projects, signing and striping generally.
Councilwoman Gilmore.
And so you said they were identified by the state?
By the state, yes.
So how does the state know to identify them? What triggers that?
They look back at crash records. Some of these things go back into the mid-1980s. We've seen them that far back where there may have been a crash between a train and a vehicle, some serious, some not. And so that's how they're identified.
Okay. And so there have been a lot of accidents that happen at 3rd?
Not necessarily. As I said, some of these we've seen them triggered by one crash where maybe a train was on the track and a car backed into it or something very minor, and some of these go back some way. So they did get on the list because of a safety identifier being some kind of a conflict, but those are not always serious.
And what was the name of this grant again through the state?
This one is at 2nd Avenue North.
I'm with you, but is there a grant or a particular name that the state uses?
Yes, ma'am. The DTR, which is Diagnostic Team Review.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Pulley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it looks like roughly 90% of this is going to be reimbursed by TDOT, is that correct?
That's correct. It's a 90-10 split. We pay 10%. They reimburse us for 90.
Of all three. It looks like a little bit of an interesting breakdown on that because it's not 90-10 for each and every one of the individual projects, but collectively it's 90%.
Right. There are some countermeasures that are identified as 100% funding. So some things qualify and some things don't. So it just depends on what the team came up with as to what qualifies.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Pulley. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1857, sponsors Vircher Bettany O'Connell, approves an intergovernmental agreement between the Tennessee Department of Transportation and the Metro Department of Public Works for the reimbursement of railroad crossing safety improvements at 3rd Avenue. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilman Pulley.
Thank you.
Mr. Hammond.
Glad you're staying close there, Mr. Hammond. So just two quick questions here. It looks like there's a 22% increase in the cost estimate. I just wonder what accounts for that. It's just construction over time costs?
No, different different things were identified in that report. So we may have had to upgrade additional signage that was out there, or take our pavement markings back further, those types of things. So this one came up to, right, 7170, I believe, was the final cost estimate on it.
And it says we're eligible for 100% reimbursement. What transitions that from eligible to actually receiving the money?
Again, it's the type of countermeasures that are selected. So if they're all 100% reimbursable, that would put us in. There must have been a couple of things in this report that were not completely, that were qualified as 90% instead of 100%.
Councilman Poole, I just want to make sure, because I know we have a lot of these intergovernmental agreements. We're on 1857.
Oh, 57?
Yes.
Oh, I thought we were on 59 for some
Not
reason.
quite.
My apologies.
Yeah. And to Councilwoman Gilmore, the prior one, we were on 2nd Avenue. Now we're on 3rd Avenue.
Council Lady Murphy has been getting on me for my bad hearing, so I guess it came into play here. Thank you.
Councilwoman Gilmore.
Thank you. I just wanted to know what department was this in, and was this triggered because this is identified as maybe a quiet zone as well? Is it a quiet zone or no?
I don't believe this is a quiet zone, and it's not triggered by that. This is the same story as the one right next to it. This one is just a different crossing on 3rd Avenue, but same line, same part of town.
Okay. And then TDOT, is there a particular department in TDOT, a particular area?
It comes out of their multimodal division.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gilmore. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1858, sponsors Virture, Bettany, and others, approves an intergovernmental agreement between the Tennessee Department of Transportation and the Metro Department of Public Works for the reimbursement of railroad crossing safety improvements at Craighead Avenue. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1859, sponsors Virture, Bettany, O'Connell, approves an intergovernmental agreement between the Tennessee Department of Transportation and the Metro Department of Public Works for the reimbursement of railroad crossing safety improvements at Nolensville Road. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? You had all your questions answered previously, Councilman Pulley? Okay. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1860, sponsor Virture and Withers, approves a Prosperity Pathways grant from the United Way to the Nashville Career Advancement Center in conjunction with the Opportunity Youth Collective. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Seeing Councilwoman Gilmore.
I'd like to just hear more about it. I always want to hear about the youth.
She's coming down.
Council Lady Gilmore, you know I'm always happy to talk about the youth. This grant...
For the view in the audience, please identify yourself.
Oh, sorry. I'm Ellen Zinkowitz from the Nashville Career Advancement Center and Opportunity Now. This grant from United Way is to target services and community coordination regarding opportunity youth. Opportunity youth are 16 to 24-year-olds out of work and out of school. Davidson County has 9,000 of these young people. That's down a little bit in this unemployment rate. We typically hover around 10, but 9,000 is still an awful lot of young people not working and not attending school at an age when they should be. So this grant allows us to do some commitment building of organizations that work with that group. It lets us look at collaborative infrastructure. How do we work better together as a city to address that issue and to help those young people get back on track, either with school or economically self-sufficient employment, and then moves us towards action and looking at how we as a city are going to best support those young people reaching their highest economic potential.
Thank you. And what does commitment building mean? How does that look?
So we are looking for organizations that maybe work with these young people but don't typically work together, and building commitments amongst them to partner together in order to achieve that action and a more collective kind of approach for solving this problem and for moving young people into gainful employment or education.
So are there monies for the groups that you guys will be partnering with, or the monies would just be for you guys to partner and reach out?
So this is primarily for the backbone organization, but some of these dollars will support engaging youth voice with this work. And as the collaborative identifies resources and facilitators together to help us all together move forward, it's a relatively short-term grant. It's only a year. And we are hopeful that it will position us as a city for further grants that would go to these participating organizations.
So when you guys partner with these organizations, and some of them may be more grassroots, but do really good work, are you able to help them build capacity in sharing data?
That is on the list of objectives, but primarily we're looking for common definitions and outcomes that we can work on together in this collective.
When you say common definitions, what do you mean?
I mean, if I were to say that I've placed somebody into employment, I might have one definition of what placement looks like, how long they've been employed, when I capture that information, how rigorous the standard has to be to say that someone is employed. I might have to get third-party verification. Some other organization may capture that information a year later, that they are still employed a year later, and they may only get it from that person. So trying to come up with common definitions for concepts that we all are talking about, but maybe tracking differently because of how we define them.
And so will you be meeting with the organizations or just asking them to send in paperwork?
Oh, no, we are absolutely meeting regularly with both the organizations, with young people who are experiencing disconnection or who have experienced disconnection, and then collectively working on the primary strands of this work, which I'm happy to send you the plan.
I would like to see that. And then also with the young people, when you're meeting with them, do they get compensated for their time in any way?
Absolutely.
Okay, and how much is the compensation and how does that look?
They are paid $15 an hour, and we believe in direct deposit, so they're paid a wage. It's Opportunity Now, and their monies are direct deposited into their accounts.
So is this specific to this group? So is it like a subgroup that's chosen from a group of, how do you identify these 16 to 24?
So we did a call out to community organizations that work with that population. We posted posters in places where they went, and we solicited from kind of the young people that we knew or had worked with in the past, and we have from that developed a really diverse group of young people. They range from 17 to 24, and their experience with this disconnection has happened in lots of different ways. We've been working with some of these young people now for a year as part of a research study about disconnection and in Nashville. And then we also have young people who are new to the work who've sort of heard about it through organizations who are also part of the collective.
And how many participants do you have?
We have about 10. It's not a huge group, but because they are really engaged and it takes a good little amount of time, we were aiming for quality and depth of opportunity with the young people rather than lots of quantity of young people in that specific role.
And you said they're diverse in age, so how many women or how many males and how many females then?
It is, I can't tell you. I'll have to send it to you.
Okay. And do you know what areas of town they come from?
All 10 of them, no. I could not tell you all of them, but we can obviously send that to you as well.
I would like to see that, and their
Sure thing.
demographics and their racial makeup.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gilmore. And I believe I do have some data regarding former Councilman, Vice Mayor, Mr. Stein, you have a lot of titles. So I do have some data that I received during budget by zip code, and I believe that is out on the SharePoint.
As it relates specifically to this program?
I forget what it was around Councilwoman Gilmore.
Okay. All right, we just want to make sure it's specific to this grant.
I will send you the information specific to this grant. I believe the zip code information is Opportunity Now wide.
Okay, yeah, just these 10 that you were talking about,
Yep.
though. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gilmore. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1861, sponsors Virtue Withers and others, declares surplus and authorizes the conveyance of property to certain nonprofit organizations, and authorizes grants not exceeding $9,800,000 from the Barnes Fund for Affordable Housing to certain nonprofit organizations selected for the express purpose of constructing and rehabilitating affordable or workforce housing. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilman Pulley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wonder if I could get Ms. Davis to come up and speak on this. I'll just let you tell us a little bit about it, and I'll ask you more questions when you're finished.
Wonderful. I'm Hannah Davis. I'm the Affordable Housing Program Manager at the Mayor's Office. We also have our grantees here today if you have specific questions about the individual grants. This was the spring round 6 of the Barnes Fund. So we put out an RFP for $9.8 million, received over 30 proposals, and there was 21 that were fundable. The top 7 were selected, and the grantees are available for questions again. This will fund 372 units throughout Nashville, and the Barnes Fund funds in 3 categories: homeownership, rental, and rehabilitation. So we have program developments that were funded in all 3 of those programs.
Okay, thank you. You say 372 units, and it's a mixture of rentals and ownership. Can you tell me specifically how one qualifies for that and how these things are deed restricted?
Yes, thank you. So the homeowner and rental programs have a deed restriction of 20 years on them, and the rehab programs really work on addressing gentrification and displacement. So the grantees work with individual homeowners who need weatherization or home improvements that will allow them to stay and maintain their home in the neighborhood. Those have a 5-year lien on them. And people qualify, residents of Nashville can qualify on the rental side at 60% of average median income, which for a family of 4 in Nashville is $48,000. So anything at that or below qualifies on the rental side. For the homeownership side, 80% and below qualifies.
So to sum this up, the organizations that are identified in the analysis here, if they, for example, want to get out of this thing and they want to sell the property, it still has a 20-year deed restriction on it to whom they sell the property?
Correct.
Okay. And are there any clawback provisions available here?
Yes. Thank you. The grant money is distributed only through reimbursement. So once the construction or perhaps the site work is completed, they submit that via a draw request. We send an inspector out to review the quality of the work. They send in a report, and then they are awarded the draw via reimbursement. So first of all, there's no money that goes out up front. It's all done once the inspection of the work is sent in. Additionally, if the work is not completed within 24 months, the Housing Trust Fund Commission, which our chair, Kaki Friskus-Warren, is here, has the option to claw back that funding. As many of you know, development takes a really long time here in Nashville, and these grantees are hard at work. So what we look for is that they have made good progress. So as you'll remember, in February, there was contract extensions that were provided. When we see that they're making really good progress, if there's not progress done, the Commission has the option to pull that money back.
Okay, and just finally on the units that are made available for ownership, if they want to pass them along to one person or another, then whoever they sell it to, they're going to have to still maintain this affordable position for 20 years.
That's correct.
Okay, all right, I don't have any more. Thank you very much. Appreciate your good work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Pulley. Councilwoman Allen.
Thank you. I appreciate the good questions of my colleague back there. And 20 years is great. We now have a community land trust that has the potential to make that even longer. How do we decide when some of these can work with the community land trust and when we're going with the 20-year deed restriction?
Yes, thank you. The 20-year deed restriction was standard operating procedure. Since the Community Land Trust is still getting through their policies and procedures as they build that land trust, we want them to have the chance to oversee those 15 properties within the land trust. In addition, there's a lot of changes in how that asset then sits on an organization's books. And so the grantees are working hard to become educated on what that process would look like internally. And that's something that the commission is reviewing, is if we want to encourage more assets to move into the land trust so that properties can maintain affordable in perpetuity.
So that's something we may see more of in the future.
Yes.
Okay,
We
I
want
think that's...
the housing fund to have a good chance to work on those 15 properties and work out some of the kinks and then report back to us so we can stay in communication.
Okay, that sounds like a good plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady.
Councilman Glover.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to ask some mechanics, I guess, is the way I want to do this. So if we're talking about $9.8 million that we're going to be utilizing of taxpayer money for 372 units, that's roughly $26,000 that we'll, quote, subsidize per unit. Because it's a grant, is that a payback or is it just, here's the money, go do these things with it?
Well, it's a reimbursement, so it's once their work is completed, then they are, there's a draw that's given out to them. It's given to the grantees as equity so that they can go and leverage additional capital to come into the project.
Okay.
For example, for this round, the $9.8 million leveraged an additional $56 million in outside capital to fund those projects. The savings are then turned down to either the homeowner or the renter or the rehab.
So basically what we're doing is their down payment for them with this because we're basically doing 20% or 20 points on the deal is what it sounds like. So when we grant this money out and reimbursement, however you want to call it, once that money's gone, is there any recapturing of that $9.8 million to the city again? In other words, property taxes, other avenues that will come back to the taxpayers that are funding all of this activity?
The savings that we look for is in the reduction of the citizens that are cost burdened. And so that has two primary effects. When someone is spending less than 30% of their annual median income, we consider them to not be cost burdened. Right now, over half of Nashvillians are cost burdened. And so obviously that is money that they can't be spending elsewhere on the renter side. Additionally, that is money that they're not able to be saving up for a down payment towards a home. And so what we are looking to do is make rental units more affordable and then create a pipeline for people to move from renter to home ownership as they prefer.
Okay, I think I did a lousy job on asking the question I'm actually trying to figure out. I think anytime we talk about raising property taxes, if it in fact is going to affect your house or the property that you have that you're living in an apartment, et cetera, if we raise your property taxes, whatever percentage, then automatically it will raise your rent that same amount. So for me, the math never works out. So what I'm trying to figure out, will there be property taxes that have to be paid on these rental units and on the homes as well?
Yes.
Okay. So from that standpoint, the money does come back into the general operating fund, but they're not giving the $9.8 million back as far as a loan because it's a grant.
Correct.
Okay. And what safeguards do we have if they're there and they have a 20-year window where they have to do this? If property taxes are raised, I guess greater than the burden can be handled by these individuals who have the lower income, what safeguards do we have in place on that?
You could speak to the individual grantees on, each of them have different mechanisms in place, but we're lucky to have a really strong pool of applicants that are, have experience doing this. They are restricted on what those incomes can be, both not only through the Barnes Fund, but often through state and federal money that they receive as well. So there's multiple avenues of accountability.
Okay, well, I think, again, I'll repeat the question. What safeguards are we putting in place for these individuals who have a lower income if we raise property taxes so drastically? Even though they're now in a 20-year commitment, they can't afford to pay the property taxes because we've now exceeded the income level that they have. I think that's the real question I'm trying to figure out. I'm just trying to get 2 and 2 to equal 4.
I can't speak to what would happen in the future. I just know that the grantees, the homeowners and the renters have been able to weather those changes in the past, and they are able to make adjustments to the rent to be able to ensure that it stays affordable. That's a reporting mechanism that they have to do for us annually to ensure that there's compliance on the rental side, and the homeownership has the restriction via the deed restriction.
Okay, well, I think that's a dangerous area. Mr. Jameson, is there any way that we can build a safeguard into this to where it doesn't exceed, that if there's a mathematical formula here, that if they're in fact going to be in something for a 20-year or whatever the timeline is there any way that we can guarantee that the investment the city is making through the Barnes Fund is in fact not going to put people out on the streets again, or, you know, make it so unaffordable they can't live there if we have property tax increases going forward? Is there any way to deal with that?
Not that I can think of, because the Affordable and Workforce Housing grant programs, by and large, expect some participation by the recipient. And if they simply fall below the eligibility or the capability of providing their share, so to speak, we don't have a mechanism in place that can replace that.
Even on the ones who have a mortgage for the homes they're buying?
Not that I can think of.
Okay, I think it wouldn't hurt for us to think this through a bit more. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Glover. Ms. Davis, do we have anyone here that could convey to the committee how it's been handled in the past? What Councilman Glover is asking, in the event taxes are raised, how do we put in place, or how do we protect the tenants from ultimately going through this cycle again with that cost of the increase being pushed down to the tenant? So you said earlier in your statement that we have the model, that they've done it before. If one of them could speak to what they've done historically, given that this really isn't nothing new. Do you have anyone you want to recommend?
Well, yes, we have many qualified applicants. If, Eddie, do you want to come up? I can say on the renter side, again, there is compliance in place. So there's not an issue of someone being put out on the streets. Those rents are set.
Yeah, Councilman Glover is asking who's going to bear the burden of that increase.
Well, all right, I'm Eddie Latimer with Affordable Housing Resources, one of the grantors. The issue of the taxes would be this, is that every time there's a tax increase, it impacts rent and it impacts the mortgages. But we hope that the tax increases are spread out so that there are pay raises in there, and generally they are, which would enable people to absorb that extra cost. But I think if we had such a tax increase that the effect was to drive 60% of the people who work in this building out of the county, I'm not sure that would be something that this council would recommend. And I could see that being the only time. The tax increases would be so gradual and the pay raises would be pretty much compensating with it, that it's just life. It's the way it's always worked since FHA was created back in the 30s. It just, you know, we always are going to have increases. We're going to have, but the mortgage for the homeowner stays the same. The principal and interest stays the same. So the increase on the homeowner's monthly payment is a lot less onerous than on the renters.
Thank you. Councilwoman Gilmore.
Thank you. I had a question about what was the bill that we signed not too long ago? I can't remember the name of it. It's the end of the semester. The end of the, as far as it's a semester.
You
as far as
asking
I'm
the chair,
concerned.
son? Lots
Yeah,
of
I am
you.
the chair. Okay, no, this one had to do with, I guess, with equity and saying that we would do business with all, trying to make, what was that called?
You talking about the procurement legislation?
Yes, the procurement. What was the name of that?
The equal.
Yeah, the equal business opportunity. Okay, so my question is, does that have any, do we apply this across the board, or does that not apply to this?
It's only for procurement, but I do want to assure you, we, myself and the commission are looking at, we have a strategic planning session that we're going through right now. One of our goals for equity regarding the grantees was to ensure that the grantees who were funded, the equity level was equal to the applications that we received.
Okay, say that again.
Yeah, sorry, my wording wasn't exactly clear. So, you know, we have equity standards that we're trying to achieve in terms of our grantee pool.
Okay, we have equity standards that we're trying to achieve. Okay, so, and maybe just tell me, what does that mean?
Yes, so because housing is a really specific field, our applicant pool is somewhat limited. And so our standard this year was that the ones who were funded, that we would have an equal proportion of funded equity representation to the applicant pool. So basically, you know, we had 30% of our applicant pool represent women or minority-led organizations, and that was what we saw in the grantees, that 30% of them were women or minority-led organizations.
Okay, so, and I'm really listening because I really want to process it. So you're saying that on these grantees, affordable housing resources, there are some African-American-led and urban house. You're saying that all these are either women-led?
No, that 30% of the grantees, out of those 7 organizations, 30% of them are women or minority-led. And so we have a scoring matrix that we use, and so, you know, it's not explicit that we would fund that at that breakdown, but that is our internal target, which we are now reviewing as well, just because we want to ensure that the fund is going to support equity work throughout the city.
Got you. Okay, so are any of these women or minority-led?
Yes, so
Okay,
Renewal
which one?
House is led by a woman of color, Pamela Sessions.
Okay.
Crossbridge is led by a woman. Rebuilding Together Nashville is led by a woman as well.
Okay,
So
got
3
you.
of the 7.
Okay. So sometimes I have to do it in a different way, that type of way. Okay, so yeah, I just think that piece is really important. It seems like you are moving in that direction. I just want to make sure that when we say it, that we really do have metrics in place. Because additionally, I was looking at the districts as well, which is a really big deal because we talk about gentrification, right? So we have to be mindful of these things because we're empowering others to build capacity. And if we're not mindful of that, we're some kind of feeding the animal that we're talking about that is an issue with. Because most of the districts were traditionally African-American districts, and we know that there are people that service those areas. Even though it is a specific area, we know that there are people that can do it, companies or nonprofits that specialize in building housing in the nonprofit sector. So we just want to make sure that we continue to measure that and honor that. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gilmore. Councilman Hall.
And I just actually wanted to piggyback on Councilwoman Gilmore's comment about the feeding of the animal of sorts. Is there, and what is the evaluation process for determining the economic impact on these areas when they're chosen? So we're not just giving property away that Metro owns in areas that are already concentrated poverty.
Yes, that's one of the focus areas of the Barnes Fund going forward, is to follow the mayor's focus of deconcentration poverty. Again, the grantees and applicants are working under really restricted conditions, basically where they can afford land, how they can secure a place for the community who already lives there, to Council Lady Gilmore's point about making sure that there are anchors of affordability in areas that are really at risk of quick transition. And so one of our grantees, Rebuilding Together Nashville, which is working in a little bit in your district, actually did a study to understand the areas that were most at risk for displacement, and that's where they've prioritized their work. So in terms of the economic impact are you asking about the portfolio as a whole or as the individual projects?
Well, just in line with the attempts to deconcentrate poverty, we know that most of the property that Metro owns and in those traditional districts that she was describing, those projects are going there because the land is cheap or because it's Metro owned. So we're looking at what is the economic impact on those communities, because if there's already concentrated poverty there, it's not an issue of displacement, it's about an issue of continued displacement, because doing those types of projects in those areas lowers those property values and deters other development.
Well, I would encourage you to look at the portfolio. The research that we have is that they do not decrease property values, especially some of the developments I would encourage you to check out are really beautifully done, and that's something that we examine, is both the design and how the development fits within the neighborhood, and we try to straddle what the neighborhood is currently and what the neighborhood is going to become. That's a constraint that exists for these developers, is they can't build something that then really causes a lot of transition in the neighborhood, but we also want them to be able to be relevant in 10 and 15 and 20 years as the neighborhood continues to develop. So we are looking at the design elements to ensure that what's being built is lifting up the neighborhood and is bringing both innovative and beautiful design that will be an asset to the neighborhood going forward.
And we really appreciate that aspect of it from a design standpoint. But just from the economic standpoint, we know that, again, most of those areas are areas that lack infrastructure, lack public transportation, have schools that are on priority lists, things of that nature. And so that was the reason for the question of determining the economic impact, because outside of the Barnes Fund, most of those projects wouldn't pass through planning or make it through a community meeting.
Well, all of the projects go through the community planning process. I can't speak to the planning commission process, but we don't offer any, we don't throw our weight behind planning. Those projects have to pass on their own. But I appreciate the point, and I'd say that's something that the commission is looking at. It's a challenge on how we help lift up communities and bring assets to the communities, but also secure affordable housing for the people who want to be able to stay and live in that community. Thank you, Councilman.
Councilman Hall.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I just hope that that is something that the commission continues to focus on, because, again, we struggle as a body trying to match certain criteria, and we're looking at things that are going to raise average median income and property value in communities. And so you don't see a lot of Barnes Fund projects being done in certain areas of the city for a specific reason. The areas where they are being done are at the point where doing things 0 to 60 or 0 to 80% AMI actually are economic deterrents. And so we just need that commission to focus more and understand that, because, again, as individual council districts, if we were to bring one of those projects to our community, it would not make it through planning or through this body. Thank you.
Ms. Davis.
Thank you. I encourage you, our commission chair is here as well, and I would welcome any of the council to attend our strategic planning session, which is on August 27th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., and I can send out the agenda to you all as well. I would encourage those comments to our commission.
Is she here? She can address the question now. Councilman Hall is asking, how are you determining where these projects occur? Many are occurring in certain areas more than others.
Sure. My name's Khaki Friskus Warren, and I'm the chair of the Barnes Fund. And I'm sitting here proofing a report that'll come to y'all tomorrow night, and it'll kind of have a bubble chart about where are most of the units being developed at the Barnes Fund. And our nonprofit partners are needing to look for land that is affordable, that they can develop on. They're also looking to bring assets to the community so that they're developing rental units that are desirable to live in. in and are designed in a way that they're an asset to the community. So we do talk about at the Barnes Fund, how do we have a broader geographic reach in Metro, and some of that can be achieved through rebuilding together, which is in various council districts. We think about that in terms of the lots that are Metro-owned that we can then pass on to our nonprofit partners. So we're very much aware of we need geographic spread across the district. We also want to be good partners in every district that we're in, and in yours, Councilman Halls and Councilman and the at-large members who are all over the district. So. We are looking carefully at geographic issues. We're also looking carefully at equity issues as they relate to our partner organizations and how they're led. Does that, I know that it's not specific because we are somewhat restricted about where we have that land that we can buy and still keep those units within 60 or 80% of AMI.
Councilman Hall.
Absolutely. And again, we greatly appreciate it, all the work that you guys are doing. It's one of those things that's an ongoing conversation that we've had with MDHA and the Barnes Fund the last few years. And the reason I mention the litmus test is because if individual council members approach their district or this body with some of those projects, we would find ourselves in an ongoing knockdown, drag-out debate over the economic impact. And we'd get the public hearing, and we'd have 100 people in the audience pushing back on those projects. And so I think part of the misconception that from a general public standpoint, I don't know how many people have heard this, it's always a topic of conversation in my district. They have some reserved feelings when it comes to the Barnes Fund because of what they believe to be a lack of transparency in that process. Because if you brought that project on its individual merit to one of those communities, the community would reject it. And so now it seems that it's only being done because, well, this is where this is an affordable property and Metro happens to own it. So it doesn't really matter a lot how the community feels about that project, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think what I'd like to do is I will reach out to you so that I can hear more clearly what your concerns are, but also what kinds of things that the Barnes Fund could do to address that more directly. And I think that we also, with our partners, we really need to be working with them so that they are helping the community see how these units are assets. I mean, I think we have a concept in our mind about what affordable housing looks like or what it brings to our neighborhoods, when when you go and see these partners' units, I would like to have them in my neighborhood. In fact, some of them are in my neighborhood.
Thank you.
Councilman Hall.
Thank you.
So you mentioned you have a report. When will we receive it?
Yes, we have a report that you should be on your desk tomorrow evening.
Okay, tomorrow evening. So committee council members, hopefully you can read it before then. Councilman Glover.
First of all, Chair, thank you for translating what I was trying to ask. I appreciate that. I take exception to the fact that cost of living adjustments actually keep up with the cost of doing business in Nashville, because that's not actually what's occurred. Certainly over the last 5 years, that is not what's occurred, because that's kind of where we are right now, 5, 6, 7 years, whatever. We can debate the timeline. If other companies handle the cost of living adjustments the way that Metro has handled it with our employees, then the formula doesn't work. And that's really the core of the question I'm asking, to try and figure out if we solve something. It sounds to me like it's a short-term solution without a long-term actual outcome, which bothers me, because we're not actually addressing the issue of cost of living for those individuals who can't afford to buy. Look, I get it. The mortgage, that stays the same. I get that. Rent does not. And so that's why I'm trying to figure out and put my finger on this thing and say, okay, if we're putting this money into it, if it's grants, do we get the money back? Are there property taxes? Are there this? Are there that? Because we know, as well as everybody else watching this that's in business, if there's a property tax increase, it's not the owner who pays it. It is and now I'm talking about rental units. It's the people who rent the units that pay it because it gets passed on to them. So it's a perpetual problem that we're only, I guess, making worse if we don't understand the unintended consequences. So that's really where I was trying to get to on the question that I was asking, to try and figure out, okay, great, we fixed this right now, but how many people sitting in this room would have ever guessed that square footage cost in Nashville would have gone, for an average house, would have gone from roughly $98 a foot to almost $200 a foot in less than a decade? I don't think any of us would have. And so that's really where and that's part of the reason we have the problem we have now for affordable housing. So that's really, I'm just trying to figure out, and that's why I asked Mr. Jameson if there was anything we could do to put in safeguards. Apparently there's not. It scares me when we do these kind of things and we haven't looked at every aspect of the unintended consequences. So, Chair, thank you for indulging me.
I might say another thing. I mean, we can certainly look at other communities about how they work with home ownership, but on the rental side of Barnes' work, many of the projects are funded for a certain number of units that are 0 to 30 AMI and another group of units that are 30 to 60 AMI. So if a renter, their income did not keep up with that rent increase, they may move from a 30 to 60% into a 0 to 30. So our nonprofit partners, remember, they're mission driven and their funding is coming from various places. So their desire is not to evict someone because they didn't keep up, stay in that 0 to 30 income level.
And while I appreciate the answer, 20 years from now, I can assure you that each of us that are sitting here won't remember this conversation. And once they're released from this and we've developed it and the property gets to turn, then it just creates a perpetual problem. So that's all I'm trying to really look is, because we can all go into our districts and I can bring you into mine right now and show you a project that was done 40 years ago or 35 years ago, whatever, that has turned into a problem because we didn't have safeguards in place. So I'm just asking us to learn from history and try to protect the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Glover. Councilwoman Gilmore.
Thank you, Chair. I had maybe 2 follow-up questions, and you may have answered them, but I might have missed them. Did you say, in addition to your partners and making sure that there's equity there and that you're looking for African Americans, women, your applicants, so at this point, who's actually applying to live in these, do you have a criteria for that as well?
Sorry, so when I said applicants, I was referencing all of the organizations, nonprofits that applied for Barnes.
Okay, yeah, I got that part. That was good. So now I'm asking in terms of when those organizations, your partners, who do they look at? Is it what's kind of the criteria so that we're making sure that we're being equitable about who even approving to get back into the community or into this housing?
Yes, and each of them have different practices for rehab, homeowner, and rental, and they could speak to those now. If there's, I don't know if you'd like to hear from all of them. They have great, they can each tell their story better than I can.
Yeah, we're probably running a little bit out of time, so I want to hear one, but I think.
No, this is committee. We don't have time in committee.
Okay, and so let me ask my other question too that I think is really important, and I want to know too, how many of them are required to, I guess, in your partnership, subcontract out some of that work, and it has to fit that same criteria, or are they not required to do that?
They can speak to that. They have policies on the book that we adhere to as well for having fair access to the contracts. In order to make sure it's not overly arduous, they are not required to share every one of their subcontractors, but would you like to hear from, I think it'd be great if you could hear from them both on their.
I would. And so I want to hear from them, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So do you guys get reports on who they're doing subcontract work with?
So as they are are all nonprofits. Again, I think Kaki made an important point to stress that they're missionally focused. So they all have their own individual boards that they're reporting to. And I think especially on the renter side and homeowner side, they have fair housing laws that they all are complying with and going above and beyond to make sure there's equitable access. We use universal design standards, so the majority of what is built through barns is accessible for people with disabilities and who need assistance.
And I'm talking about the subcontract with the partners.
Yes,
Just so
that's on the applicant side. And they have standards that they already use internally that they have worked through with their boards to approve. And so that's what they submit to us as the standard that they will use to ensure equitable access.
So do we have a way, the only piece I'm not clear about, I understand about the arduous part. Are we measuring, once we grant these contracts to our partners, who they're subcontracting with?
We don't currently measure that, but we could explore that through the commission.
Okay, I think that's pretty important, and I would like to hear Ms. Chair.
Yeah, we probably charged the chair of affordable housing with doing another special call meeting surrounding this. And Ms. Davis, you're getting a lot of questions from the committee because I know they hear it in the community as it relates to the success or lack thereof of the program, and that's no indictment against you. We are front line with many of the neighbors in the community, so that's why you're receiving these questions, and you do great work. But we know it's not. We're just not quite there yet, so that's why you're receiving these questions.
And if we can, I don't want to really take up any more time, but I would ask that we would defer because I do have more questions, and I am. I guess, concerned about it as it relates to, I think we talk about equity and wealth building, and I'll just say this, it's a lot of cranes in this city, and a lot of time, different developers or persons that would be subcontractors, whether they're people of color or women, are saying that they're not participating in it, and so I don't know if
Councilwoman, I'm going to ask you to hold your motion. I'm going to come back to you because you didn't formally give it to me. I'm going to go to your colleague that's been waiting for discussion too. Councilwoman Allen, are you seeking recognition as well? Councilman Menendez.
Thanks. I just wanted to address a couple of the points that have been raised. First, as far as I think the chair asked the affordable housing providers, if any of them would address how property taxes have been handled in the past. And I think the person in the room with more experience than everybody else combined on this came up, Mr. Latimer, and he gave his experience, which is that I think what he led with when property tax increases are spread evenly over time, it's not a problem. And I think we need to respect that that's his experience. I mean, to the people who raised the question, if property taxes are going up. They've always gone up. It costs more for property tax today than it did 20 years ago. It'll cost more 20 years from now than it does today. That's why these programs get set up in order to try to preserve affordability in quickly changing neighborhoods. And then the question about the units, I really do encourage people to go visit the units that have been built already with these funds and the other units by the organizations that are present here today. And I think uniformly you'll find that it's a really nice product. And to the extent that nice product can be used as anchors for affordability in neighborhoods going forward, I think that helps prevent gentrification. And I always want to mention in connection with the Barnes Fund, like, you know, the for sale units, we're talking about 80% of AMI or less. So that's, as we're all fond of saying, that's our Metro employees, that's school teachers, that's people who do the everyday work of Metro government. It's not like it's people that you don't want to be your neighbor. So I would encourage us, if we need to have more questions, that's fine, but this hopefully gets passed in one of these next two meetings. Thanks.
Councilman Mendez, maybe you can do a joint committee meeting and a tour. To Councilman Hall's point, we know not all districts are created equally, and sometimes we try to do the cookie cutter approach, and what he's talking about is just increasing the level of transparency. It goes a long way in the public narrative. We also always have to be mindful of this climate that we're in, and I know you're aware of that because you're countywide.
Right, and I guess I'll mention, from sitting on the audit committee, I mean, there was a recent audit of the Barnes Fund Commission, and they've, from the audit committee perspective, have been very responsive on moving the ball forward on these issues, especially about transparency. I think the thing that we all need to keep in mind is that the commission is still in its relative infancy. It's only a few years old. I think it knows, and I think we know, and the audit committee knows now, that it needs to be able to keep growing. And part of the question is, are we going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good? There is a lot of good that's being done, but the commission is relatively new. Still, it's only been through a couple of rounds, and so issues on transparency and how to measure units and how to see over time what made for a successful grant and an unsuccessful grant, those are things that, I think everybody would agree the work product is good, and trying to figure out perfect in the last 14 days of this term might be difficult. And so I would encourage us to accept that good on this is really pretty good, and not let the seeking perfection in the next 14 days hold us up. That said, if anybody wants to take a tour of units by any of these companies, I'm sure, nonprofits, I should say, I'm sure we could arrange it in the next couple weeks.
We'll put that on. We're going to charge you with that, Councilman Mendez, since you're not in a runoff. Councilwoman Allen. I couldn't help myself, Councilman Mendez.
Thank you. I just want to check on timing. Can someone speak to any issues that might be caused by deferral?
Yes, there are a number of grantees that are ready to hit the ground. We take this community input really seriously, but we are going through a strategic planning process and can incorporate this into, like Councilman Mendez says, as we continue to build the Barnes program. But this would delay the breaking ground and moving forward of units that I think, based on the research we've seen, are really needed throughout the community.
What kind of delay?
Each of the grantees would have to speak to their own situation.
Okay,
There
please
would be
come up.
Financing delays and land delays.
The question was raised as it relates to deferral. It's not an official motion on the floor. The committee members need to know the impact of that motion, if such is entertained.
Good afternoon. I'm Lucille Houseworth. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for Habitat for Humanity of Greater Nashville. In terms of the delay, I think one of the complexities of this is, as was referenced, a lot of the funds are combined with other sources of funding. And so for our particular project, which includes 15 units in the Park Preserve community, which would be home ownership, we have grant deadlines that are with other sources of funding in terms of when the units need to be completed. So it isn't like it's a single source of funding where it would be delayed just because this was 100% of the funding. As you're probably aware, one of the criteria in the grant is that you put forth how many other sources of funding you have to really leverage the money. So I think that it's something that would have to be looked at and could actually have kind of a ricochet effect on other sources of funding and actually being able to complete some of our grant terms with other funders, in our case with housing and urban development and other like local sources of independent funding. So it actually would be complicated for sure, just because of the layering of the funding that it actually is required, or at least requested, in the application. And while I have the floor, could I address two other things?
The floor is yours.
Okay. I wanted to address the issue of the subcontractors, and I just wanted to share with you what we do at Habitat. we have a finance committee that reviews all of our subcontractors and basically anybody that we do business with. And for anything where we're spending $5,000 or more, the finance committee requires that the entity that is bidding the work, whether that be for construction or if it be for other services that might be purchased for the agency, that we get 3 bids and that we review those with the committee. So I think that process is in the minutes. Those minutes are reported to the board of directors. And so in our own particular case, even though that is not all shared with the Barnes Commission, we have a rigorous process that we follow at the agency. And I've been there 10 years. I feel very confident that we look at those sorts of criteria that you're talking about and that we do consider alternatives in terms of new businesses, women and minority-owned businesses, those sorts of things, under a formal committee process. And then the last thing I wanted to say while I had the floor had to do with how do we ensure that the services are made available to those who most need them. One of the criteria in our Barnes grant was that we were awarded points for kind of a diversification approach to who gets the funding. And so, for example, we were asked in our grant and committed to it to ensure that some of the units were received by seniors, kind of elderly folks, those with disabilities, new Americans, large families, people coming from homeless situations. And so those are a subset, of course, of those that really have significant need for affordable housing in this growing community. You know, the great news is this community is booming. I think it's just a challenge for affordable housing. And so that's one of the ways that we address it, is not just with the income criteria under 80%, but ensuring diversity in who is awarded the units.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Gilmore.
Okay, yes, I was listening very, very intently because I want to make sure I'm listening very, very intently. I don't know that the 3 bids translates into looking at specifically what we're talking about as it's a difference between 3 bids and 3 bids to make sure that there are minorities and women participating. I'll share a quick story, and I don't think that 2 weeks will make a difference. When I was on my second term as a council person for the 19th district, MDHA did some SP2 funds. They gave away over $4 million. We had like 4 or 5 nonprofits that specialized in housing that were directly off of Jefferson Street. They granted every nonprofit that was not close to Jefferson Street that money. So we met, and they realized the error, and then they kind of reconfigured those funds. I'm just saying, I think we really have to kind of look at what we're doing, and I think sometimes, because I know that there's the North Nashville Community CDC over there. I know that there's the church that's also there, and that Be a Helping Hand. I mean, I just know that, I guess that's my point. In this 21st district, and I know that there are African Americans that specialize in this, and I don't see any of their names there, but sometimes we give money out, and the people that have been doing the work and have worked in that community for a long time, for whatever reason, they're not getting money from the city. And I don't know that that's equity. I don't know if it's I don't know how you do it. That's why I just would like to see it more. It's just very interesting that none of those people are those nonprofits. And I just like for it to be explained to me why for years, and they've been doing it since 12 or 14 years ago now, because I've been on the council 14 years, but yet they're still not on there. Because I think as a city, we're not helping them to build capacity, or maybe I'm wrong. That's why I just would like to look at the data, understand it a little bit more. But I do know for a fact, like I said, there's 4 well-established nonprofits that specialize in housing, and it's about 7 or 8 properties that's over in that district, and none of their names are on there. So, I mean, we see cranes going up everywhere, and everybody talks about prosperity and building capacity, but I just want us to be mindful of that, and that's why I'm asking for the 2-week deferral. I just want to make sure we're sane and committed. It's not saying that we're not, but I just would really like to look and see, and I guess that is the reason I bring that up. It's 6 or 7 nonprofits associated around this property, and none of them are there, and they've been there forever. That's all. So I would like to,
Wait a minute, Councilwoman.
you trying to keep me from doing a move to?
I'm going to come back to you because we have other council members. We're still on the discussion. I'm going to come back to you.
Very good.
Councilwoman Allen, were you still seeking recognition? Okay. Your mic is on. Oh, you turned it off. You were not. Okay. Councilman Glover.
I want to make sure everybody's sitting down when I make this statement. Last meeting, Councilman Mendez says I'm going to agree with Councilman Glover. This meeting, I'm going to say I agree with Councilman Mendez.
Uh-oh.
I don't think that I don't think we need to necessarily defer it. I think that as we go forward, because if we do, and for some reason there's a hiccup and it doesn't get done in this term, we're throwing it to the next council. Whoever's sitting out here, this is complex. This is a very complex issue. I think we all would agree with that. I think the proper thing to do is try to take every aspect of the questions that have been raised and then just look at them to where we don't have unintended consequences, because unfortunately, that's what gets us. So I won't support a deferral simply because the answers that you're going to tell me 2 weeks from now of what I ask you won't be any different than what you've given me today. That doesn't mean I like the answers today, but it is the answer today. Regardless of who's here, in a few months, I just really hope that we will embrace that piece of it, because one of the things that has occurred in Nashville, even without a property tax increase, the values have grown so drastically. And that's one of the reasons we're sitting in the predicament we're in right now. So while I appreciate the fact that maybe we haven't raised the property taxes, we're collecting a lot more money than we did 5 years ago because of, and a lot of it is because of property taxes. So I'm just simply asking us to complete the circle and understand the full transition from beginning to what does 20 years from now look like. Thank you for indulging me, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Glover. Councilwoman Dow.
Thank you. I just want to piggyback on something that Council Lady Gilmore shared. I do think what she shared has relevance because we are seeing in our city a lot of people who have been doing this type of business for many, many years. They're being left out and not included. And so I think it would be helpful for us to know, like, what is your process for engaging some of those nonprofits? This Barnes Fund, in my opinion, has been very blurry, I would say, if I had a word for it. It has not been as transparent as I would like it. It seems like we're putting a lot of money into these programs. I'm not really seeing a lot of outcome. Every time we talk about it, it's like millions and millions and millions of dollars. It makes good media sound bites, but at the end of the day, I don't see the outcomes that I was looking forward to seeing with the program. It's not returning the yield that I anticipated, and also it's not getting and engaging the nonprofits that I thought that they would. So I'm wondering if you could, by tomorrow, jot down and just tell us, or even today, what is the process for choosing these nonprofits that you are engaging with to deliver these housing? Are you able to give us a list of who's applied to partner with you? And who was turned down and who was guaranteed, and also what type of efforts that you have and you all are making to engage some of these local people, and minorities especially, who are in the same business and have been in the business for many, many years before this big pot of money came along, providing housing to those in need within our city. So I think if you could answer some of that, that will help me feel a little bit more comfortable about it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Dow.
Thank you, Council Lady. And again, you'll have this report on your desks tomorrow, but of the 19 organizations that have been funded by the Barnes Fund in the last 5 years, 13 of them are run by women or minorities. And so you referenced 3 organizations. 2 of them have been funded in the past, 15th Avenue Baptist and Be a Helping Hand. In development, $9.8 million just goes really quickly, and we work to stretch it as much as we can. But in addition to the capacity building work that we've funded in the past and are looking to fund going forward, we're also focused on addressing the scale of the challenge. And so that's something that the Commission and the Review Committee holds in constant tension. But those organizations have been funded, we will look to continue to fund them in the future. And we have offered mentoring to the ones who were not funded this round so that they can work with a development specialist pro bono so that they're able to continue to grow their capacity. And I've talked with other experts in LA and around the country to try to understand how we can improve our capacity building efforts as well so that the outcomes that we see from those programs continue to improve.
Councilwoman Dow.
Thank you, Chair. Are you able to break down, because oftentimes we speak about minorities, I really want to know how many black and brown-owned firms. So when you tell me the 13 of the 19, will you give me a list of how many were firms that were African-American or Latino versus just women? And the other thing I was going to say,
Ms. Davis, is that in the report tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay, that'll be great.
Wait a minute, Councilwoman Dow. So tomorrow, council members will be in committee. When will they receive the report? Because they won't have time to read, digest the report before council meeting.
I can send it to you digitally.
I mean, if you have it, we don't need to wait until tomorrow to disseminate the information to council members.
Through Mr. Jameson this evening, so you can all review it after the meeting.
Thank you, Councilwoman Dow.
Okay, and I just want to verify also, will it include in this 98.1 million, what percentage of that dollar amount went to these minority, specifically African-American firms and smaller ones? Do you have that broken out by dollar?
For this round, the
Yes.
$9.8 million, I can break that down.
Okay, and then as I leave council, because I'm one of those that's leaving, going on to greener pastures, but I would like to know, I'm going to keep up with this housing, rest assured of that. I would like to know also, and you can get this to me before my last meeting, about your targeted outreach, because that's something that I definitely want to be involved with in the community. For those firms that were not included in this first round, I would like to know who they are and see how I can volunteer my services to engage them and help you all enable them to get business with the city. So I'll volunteer myself with that.
Ms. Davis, will that be in the
Thank you.
report also?
Yes, I'll put your number on the front page of the report.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
No, genuinely, thank you so much. That mentorship is really important. And the organizations that we funded in the past in the capacity rounds have given the feedback that, and some of them didn't reapply this round because they said, this is so much more work than we anticipated and we're having so many learning curves. And so that's why we didn't do a capacity building round this last round, because we wanted the chance to examine our practices, what was working, what was not working, to really make sure we're building capacity and not just checking, the box.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Councilman Mendez.
Thanks. So I've had the honor of serving on the board of North Nashville Affordable Housing Organization, New Level CDC, which is started as a service at Mount Zion Baptist Church. I've been on their board for a couple of years, and I believe in earlier rounds they received money from the Barnes Fund. And just as one data point from that organization, that would be one that is small, could use capacity building, and is very much, after having had been funded in a previous round, frankly needs to absorb the experience and would never want a high percentage of their projects to be involved in the Barnes Fund. One of the things that's difficult for the big affordable housing agencies, but especially for the small ones, is the huge unpredictability that the council injects, which is no knock on us, we're doing our job. But if you're owning a piece of property and you're a small agency and you don't have the foggiest idea whether it's going to get council approval in 1 month or 6 months later, the carrying cost for the property for that time period can be a burden, no matter what size you are, but especially for the small ones. And again, that's not necessarily arguing one way or the other, but I think there's good reason to believe that the smaller affordable housing agencies, they absolutely positively know about the Barnes Fund. They absolutely positively know about the timeline for applying, but there can be really important practical reasons where if somebody can't promise them, oh, we're going to be good to go, and if you get approved, you'll have money on X date, then that unpredictability can make it difficult to participate just on the carrying cost of the property alone. This is part of what I mean by, this program is going to have to go through a few more rounds of financing before all the cylinders are clicking just right and the capacity building is clicking just right. Just my 2 cents worth. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Mendez. Councilwoman Gilmore.
I would still like to look into it more. Construction is the biggest thing that we're doing in Nashville right now, even though we say it's music. And I guess to speak to the point I said earlier, a lot of times these organizations are in the community, they're there for years and years, and then because of they're not able to reap the benefits of what happens. And it was just curious to me that those organizations that are all around, like you said, New Level CDC, 15th Avenue, Be a Helping Hand, none of those organizations were in there. And if it's a capacity issue, which I said earlier, we need to work on building capacity. We need to unbundle. We know that you can, certain governments guarantee money to fill in the gaps when those smaller organizations don't have money. I mean, if we're trying to build capacity, trying to equalize things, we know that we will have to do things a little bit differently. Or we could just keep on moving and the rich keep on getting richer in the city, and people that don't live near the district, next to the district, benefit from a poverty-stricken area when the people that service that area are not able to participate. I mean, so.
Ms. Davis, did some of them apply this round?
Yes, Be a Helping Hand applied. They were very close. They were right on the cusp, and I worked with their CEO to understand what he could do differently next round.
Will that be in the report?
The scores of the ones who applied this last round?
I'm just trying to, we're going to get information this evening. I'm trying to, so Councilwoman Gilmore can have this information this evening. I'm trying to move us, because she's going to make a motion to defer, so I'm asking you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it won't be in the report, but just because we try to keep it a little bit confidential for the sake of the applicants, but I can send you a list of everyone who applied and where they scored.
Yeah, but I think if we're seeing that it's trouble or they're almost close, we need to have it. And see, I've been a little bit more laid back because I've been at large. But when I was in 19th District, like I said, we stopped it and we reallocated the money because it's not fair to those organizations that work in that area day in and day out, and they can never qualify to be approved for receiving monies for areas they serve. And organizations that are not in that area get the money. And this is city money. We're grouping all these houses together. People don't have to go through the process, and we're giving $9.8 million. We're not helping those people when you're specifically, I'm not a district council person, so I've been kind of low about it, but when I was a district council person, and this is a 19th district issue, or 21st district issue, and I'm saying that these organizations, Be a Helping Hand is very close in that vicinity. New Level CDC. These other organizations are not as close in proximity. So I'm saying I don't know how fair that is, especially if they're applied and we're not helping them to build capacity, and they've been in business for 14 and 15 years. And Nashville is everywhere you look, there's a crane, there's some type of construction, and those people in those areas are not able to benefit. Something's wrong with the system. That's all and I would like to know specifically what it is as we continue to dole out money as a city.
Is there a proximity criteria in scoring?
There's a requirement for proximity to transit, but there's not a proximity requirement for the organization. And to clarify, Be a Helping Hand and New Level have both received funding in the past. No organization receives funding every round. It's a different scoring based on what their project is.
And I understand, and I'm not I'm just saying if we're trying to build equity, it would be interesting to see how much money we've given out. And I think as the chair shared earlier, or it might have been Council Lady Dow, how much each of these organizations get. I mean, to me, it's just nowhere else do people let people just come into the community and you dole out the money to everyone else and they're giving services, but they never have the capacity to quite make it to do the services. That's just strange. It's not normal. And it's not a strike against you guys. I'm just saying if we're for equity and building capacity, Be a Helping Hand is not a new organization. New Level CDC is not a new organization. If they got the money once, we need to help them build the capacity to do it again. Other organizations that are bigger and bigger and bigger, and they do a great job because they had a lot of chance to do it and they have a lot of support. That's all I'm saying. Mr. Latimer does a wonderful job. I've met with him years over years. But if we look at the proximity and those organizations that service, I just don't know how fair that is. and that's how I leave it. I would move to defer, but if it's not supported, I won't be upset.
There's a motion to defer. Councilwoman, specify the duration of your deferral. You want a one-meeting deferral?
Yes.
Okay, it's a motion for a one-meeting deferral. Is there a second? It's been moved and properly seconded. We're voting on a one-meeting, Councilman Glover, come on. We're voting on a one-meeting deferral. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No. Do we need to show of hands? All in favor? Show of hands, Councilman Hall. Opposed? I'm not voting. Motion fails. I can't see it. 2 for, 7 against, 1 not voting. We're back on the original motion. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1862 appropriates $200,000 from the Office of Family Safety, $200,000 from the Public Library, $200,000 from Social Services, $200,000 from the Juvenile Court, $200,000 from the Health Department to various nonprofit organizations selected to receive Community Partnership Fund grants. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilwoman Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've poked around some in budget books looking for evaluations and have found many of them, but have not yet been successful at learning where these individual department evaluations are done. Can someone direct me to where I could see those?
Sorry, I'm not following the question. What do you mean by independent evaluation?
Well, when we do direct appropriations for nonprofits, you can go in the budget process and dig not too deeply, and you can see where someone has asked for an audit and how much money is spent and how many individuals have been served. And to me, it's really good information. Yes. And I'm expecting that information is available for these as well, but have not been able to find it for the ones that are awarded by these 4 departments.
Let me follow up on that and get back to you. We'll get you something back tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Okay,
Yeah.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Can you send that to Mr. Jameson so that can be forwarded to Budget Committee and council members?
Yes, ma'am.
Any further questions, Councilwoman Allen? Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Resolution is recommended. RS 2019-1863, sponsors Vercher and Betnay, approves an amendment to the lease agreement between Metro and Square Investment Holdings, LLC, for the office space in the Washington Square Building located at 222 2nd Avenue North. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is recommended. Now we're on bills on second reading. We have BL 2018-1320, sponsors Mendez and Elrod, approves an amendment to the Rutledge Hill redevelopment plan. Councilman Mendez.
So I'd like to move approval on second reading and then give you guys an explanation.
It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilman Mendez.
All right, so this one and the next one are both 2018 tax increment financing bills that, as I've mentioned several times, these are the fallback in case my other TIF bills from 2019 don't pass. It seems like they're going to pass tomorrow on third reading. What I would like to do with these two that are in second reading is to pass them on second, so they're set for third at the next meeting. If my other bills from 2019 pass tomorrow, my plan would be to withdraw these on third reading next time. So bottom line, 1320 and the next one, I'd like to move them to be approved on second reading today.
And just so we're clear, Councilman Mendez, although we're not on it, that same explanation applies to 1328 also?
Correct.
Okay. It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Bill is recommended. Now we're on BL 2018-1328, sponsors Mendez, Cooper, Henderson, amends the Metro Code regarding tax increment financing, development and redevelopment plans. It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Bill is recommended. We're on BL 2019-1643, substituted. Sponsor is Hall. Requires all existing culverts, inlet storm drains, and ditches within the T2 Rural Neighborhood Policy, T3 Suburban Neighborhood Policy to be upgraded, retrofitted, and are constructed to current stormwater management manual standards by January 1, 2025. Councilman Hall. You're the only one on it, and I don't have a letter from you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to move to defer this bill indefinitely. We've continued to meet with all the pertinent departments, stormwater, water, public works. We even had one today, which was a really good meeting, and so we're close. But we're going to continue to work through the break and come back with something I believe that's going to be a much better bill.
Thank you so much. You just moved it. Do I still need to take the vote? Okay. It's been moved. The motion has been made for an indefinite deferral. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Bill is deferred indefinitely. We're on BL 2019-1731, sponsors Davis, Anthony Davis, and Bettany, amends the Metro Code pertaining to the definition of responsible bidder or offerer and the evaluation factors considered in procurement, and to amend the Metro Code regarding information reported by employers. There is a proposed substitute. Councilman Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I'll move my substitute and then discuss if I can.
It's been moved and seconded.
Cool, thank you. So originally, just want to kind of explain that since I deferred it on second, never really talked about it, but we were trying to raise the standards of our contractors, of course, doing procurement for Metro, if you checked out your analysis. Basically, how we were going to do that was redefining what responsible bidder was, or sort of enhance the definition of what a responsible bidder was when someone was bidding on a procurement project, specifically construction, but procurement project. Evaluate through the procurement the contractor's workforce efforts, safety, apprenticeship, that sort of thing. And then again, similar to the Do Better bill we did, have them submit more information to us on their practices like OSHA certifications, apprenticeships. So we did a couple meetings with the administration, and obviously I'd heard some pushback from the last reading. So this is basically the work that I did in between is the substitute, and we've cut a good bit of it out. Met with Ashford and Michelle, Metro Legal. What the amendment does was, one, it softens Section 1 to make it where we're basically just giving the procurement officer a little bit of latitude to remove an irresponsible bidder, but it doesn't make them do anything. It's not a, oh, you know, this person has an OSHA violation and they're out or something like that. It's, if you had a chronic like OSHA offender, or if you had a chronic wage theft offender, it would give currently Ms. Hernandez-Lane the ability to remove that contractor. So that's all it's saying, is giving them some latitude to do that. And then we had also heard from some of the minority contractors, the DBE folks. And so you'll see in the substitute, we struck basically the biggest section out of this out, that was the evaluation factors. I also sent this revised version to Clay Crownover of the ABC, and he said this seemed much more palatable, so that I even got a response from them. So basically, instead of doing something, you know, a lot more, I guess, quote, controversial, even though it shouldn't necessarily have been controversial, but it was going to take a lot more work and a lot more you know, effort to sort of bring parties along. So what we ended up with was just giving the Section 1 where we're giving Ms. Hernandez-Lane that ability, and then also more reporting on the backside where we would get more information on sort of the contracting practices, safety practices, OSHA, apprenticeship, that sort of thing. So did I explain that fairly, Mr. Jamison? I just want to make sure you may want to add something.
That was excellent. Thank you.
So again, that's what the amendment is. Definitely hope you support the amendment, and hopefully we're in a better place. I don't want to speak for them, but Metro Legal said they were in approval of this. Ashford and Michelle, we left to the second meeting that they said they were good with this. So that's kind of how we left it after these meetings, and here we are. open to commentary and questions.
Councilman Mendez, discussion on the substitute.
Thanks to Councilman Davis. That explanation was very helpful. I guess I was just going to ask the administration if it has a position.
We're supportive of the substitute.
Thanks.
Councilman Glover.
And one of the questions I was going to ask is, you had said amendment, and then I was like, wait a minute, this is substitute.
Don't start that, Councilman
Yeah.
Glover.
No, I'm simply asking.
We're beyond the budget.
No, we're not. But here's what I want to know, because this, frankly, I was trying to follow it, so I'm glad that we got the explanation. Would it be possible, because I'd like to go back in, and now that we've got the substitute and really kind of dig in a little bit deeper just to read it, could we just have it re-referred back into us in the event there's any questions for third reading? I understand the timeline. I'm not asking to defer or anything. Let's go ahead and move it on forward. But I would like for it to come back in here in the event there's questions. If not, we'll move on with it.
Yeah, the sponsor is reasonable. He said yes.
Yeah, I'd be fine with that, and
All right.
just in
Thank you.
case there's
Thank you.
anything that
Thank you,
comes up.
Councilman Glover.
Yep, thank you.
Councilwoman Gilmore.
Thank you. I just wanted to tell Councilmember Davis over there, I appreciate his hard work. He got a couple questions last week. Was it last week or the week before? That last meeting, and he really did work on it prior to hearing. So I just appreciate him. And as we sign out, gonna miss you, buddy, over there, but we appreciate your hard work for the unions.
Thank you so much. We'll miss you too. And yes, we did take it a step back, but I think it's good that we've got a framework there and something that we could move forward, and just kind of making a statement that we do want. We spend a lot of money on metro procurement. We want to make sure we've got responsible contractors.
Protecting workers, indeed. Okay, so all in favor?
The substitute.
Opposed? So now we're on the bill as substituted. Make your motion, Councilman Davis. Move for approval with a re-referral back to Budget and Finance. Seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Bill is recommended with a re-referral back to Budget and Finance. Now we're on BL 2019-1798. Is that Scott Davis?
Yes.
BL 2019-1798, Davis, Scott Davis, Bettany, O'Connell, authorizes Metro to acquire a parcel of property known as 1012 Apex Street for the Apex Storm Screening Facility Improvements Project. Do you have a letter from, okay, it's deferred.
Hill?
Oh, you want me to move it? We're gonna move it to the Hill. Councilman Glover.
What I was going to ask is, because I obviously don't know the relevance of this, it's somebody else's deal, but Mr. Jameson, is it possible that we go ahead, and can I sign on to it, and we go ahead and move it? That way we're not putting it in jeopardy, realizing this is a second reading.
Or suspend the rules, or suspend Rule 19 and allow it to be considered by the committee in the absence of a sponsor.
Well, if the sponsors don't mind, I'll sign on just to go ahead and get it moved.
I'm not a sponsor on it, and none of the sponsors are
Okay,
here.
well, then I
so-
guess we're going to have to suspend rules then, I guess. Is that right, Mr. Jameson?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman, are you moving to suspend the rules, Councilman Glover, so you can?
Is there any objection?
Any objection? Councilman Glover.
Then with that, Mr. Jameson, let's make sure, I would just like to sign on. That way we get it moved in second, and we can deal with it tomorrow night if there's something that needs to be dealt with. Okay. Thank you. So I move the bill, please.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Bill is recommended. We're on BL 2019-1800. Sponsor Dow amends the Metro Code authorizing an increase in the assessment rate for the South Nashville Central Business Improvement District for Metro Nashville and Davidson County. Councilwoman Dow.
Actually didn't press my button, but you probably heard me talk about this before. This is just a rate increase for the assessment from 45 cents to $1 for the business improvement district that we set up out in South Nashville in Century Farms. Two things to note: it doesn't involve any taxpayers' money, any tax increment financing, or any of that. It's basically those property owners, which currently all the property belongs to the developer because it's not developed yet, assessing themselves a fee to cover infrastructure in the area. And I ask that you support it. We need to move forward with building the roads and the infrastructure in this area. And that's it, so I ask for your approval.
It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilman Pulley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very familiar with these, and you appropriately explained everything. I think they're wonderful things, and congratulations for getting this done and keeping it rolling out there in Southeast Nashville. So I'm very proud to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Pulley, and we always appreciate your support out in Southeast. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Bill is recommended. Now we're on bills on third reading. Sponsors, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. BL 2019-1524, sponsors Virtue Hall, amends the Metro Code regarding definitions of qualified company and qualified project and eligibility for economic and community development incentive grants. I'm going to move to definitely defer this, and the reason being is that we've had a lot going on, and I haven't been able to put the work in for it. So I'm going to definitely move to definitely defer. It's been moved and seconded. No discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Bill is indefinitely deferred, and that concludes our Budget and Finance Committee meeting.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.